To the listening audience, I am so happy to be here today with our future DA, Joe Gonzales. He's given us opportunity to kind of hear his voice about what he proposes for the criminal justice system. I've always committed to my community that I will bring the elected officials close to the community so they can understand the issues and we can get the supports that we need. So Joe, I'm so happy that you've been able to give me some time today.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and today we just want to have a conversation, a simple conversation around your platform, the vision that you have for the DA's office, because I want folks to understand that there may be issues that we want to happen a certain way and it can't, just by nature of the laws or whatever. So we'll go into a little of that. So Joe, why don't you start off telling folks who you are? Introduce Joe Gonzales to this community.
Sure, thank you very much. Well, first let me tell you, I'm a native San Antonian. I was born and raised here. I grew up for most of my life on the west side. For most of my life, I grew up across the street from Kennedy High School. I was educated here. Went to St. Mary's University, obtained a bachelor's in political science, and then went on to law school. And I have been very blessed with a good career. I started my career after I became licensed, worked in the district attorney's office. I'm actually a former state prosecutor. I worked under 3 different elected district attorneys. And then I left because I learned as a prosecutor that crime and punishment, like life, is not black and white. There's a lot of gray. And I felt like at the time that I'd be better suited as a criminal defense lawyer. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 22 years or so.
So you're truly a homeboy.
Absolutely.
That have saw through the years what has happened in our community. So you have a really what I call a front row, a firsthand experience of what's been happening with law enforcement in the city of San Antonio and Bexar County.
That's correct. And that's what I like to say is the difference between myself and my opponent is I come with empathy because I grew up, like I said, in the poor parts of town. I remember what it was like being part of the free lunch program. So I remember what it was like to struggle. You know, my mother, who was a single parent, raised 4 boys, and so we remember the struggles that she had, and we understand, what it takes to make ends meet.
Great. Well, Joe, as you well know, law enforcement and the African American community has had challenges. And so I know one of the things that me and you have talked about is restorative justice. And I know that's a passion of yours. Why don't you kind of share a little bit what your definition of restorative justice and what you'd like to see happen?
Thank you very much. And if I can explain to you that part of my platform, and I've been saying this since the primary, is I'm running on criminal justice reform. And so reform to different people means different things. Obviously, reform can mean change, and there will be some change in the district attorney's office if I'm fortunate enough to get elected. But part of the reform includes the concept of restorative justice. What that means to me is, especially when we're talking about our youth, when we're talking about our underprivileged youth who may be crosswise with law enforcement or may get in trouble. And I'm talking about minor offenses, obviously.
What we used to call childhood pranks.
Right. Another concept is the school to prison pipeline.
Okay.
That's what I think that the district attorney's office can be conscious of to try and avoid where possible. So part of the restorative justice model is, are there times when someone, again, if we're talking about a nonviolent offense, if we're talking about an individual that maybe this is his first brush with the law, is there an opportunity for him to get a second chance? Is there an opportunity to divert that person away from the traditional punishment so that he can take advantage of some kind of diversionary programs and avoid a conviction? Because what happens a lot of times, as you well know, is if somebody ends up with a conviction, especially for what is called a crime of moral turpitude, a crime of dishonesty, it stays with them the rest of their lives.
Wow.
And then they can't apply to those great jobs that we all like to apply for.
Can't get Pell Grants.
That's
We've
right.
already almost put a nail in their coffin.
Exactly. And so those are the kinds of issues that we want to see if we can do something to do our part to again restore them back into the community so they can be productive citizens. Because not only is it an issue of restoring them, but it can also be a tax saving measure, because instead of being a tax burden, that individual can be a tax paying citizen if he ends up with a good job that he might be able to take advantage of because he didn't have that conviction that he might otherwise have had.
So now we can have more productive young people.
Absolutely.
Rather than criminalizing our young people. And again, Joe, you know, the African American community and law enforcement has been crossways. Right. And so from the DA's office, is there a way you think we can bridge some of that?
Absolutely. One of the things that I'm committed to, and I've been fighting this fight for years, is to end racial profiling. And I'm not saying that law enforcement in this area engages in that, but we know that there have been issues about that across the country. Yes. And if I'm in the district attorney's office, I'm going to instruct my prosecutors, especially my chiefs, to ensure that if a person is prosecuted, it's going to be because they broke the law. It's going to be because there was reasonable suspicion to stop that individual, that there's going to be probable cause for that individual to be arrested, and it's going to be based on the facts of whether or not they committed a crime, not based on the color of their skin or the money in their wallet. And so that is something that I've been committed to for years, and I'm going to continue to be committed to that as the elected district attorney.
And we appreciate that, Joe. And people before you have said similar things. Mm-hmm. Okay, one of the things that I'm hoping that we can develop, and that's why I love having this dialogue with you, is that we can develop a partnership with the community. So tell me this, I've been asked, let's say we have a road cop, mm-hmm. because we know that 95% of the cops truly are trying to do the right thing. In any industry, you're going to have bad actors. Is it possible, when we hear the cases that it's a blatant fault of law enforcement, but they don't get prosecuted or anything? Is that because of the laws? Is that because of the environment? It's just a hard situation to prove. Help us understand why that happens, that law enforcement does not get prosecuted when it's a blatant fraudulent act.
Well, again, if there are cases, and as you mentioned, there are bad apples in any profession, in any industry. You have bad lawyers, like you can have bad cops and bad politicians.
Yes,
right?
For sure.
And so what we want to do is ensure that if certain individuals that wear a badge have engaged in illegal conduct and have violated the rights of prisoners or defendants, that those people be prosecuted. And I'm sure that the heads of those agencies would embrace that philosophy, because there's nothing worse than for a sheriff or a police chief to appear to be trying to cover or protect someone who's a bad apple. So I think everybody wants that. And what we're going to do on our side is we're going to ensure that when a police officer or someone that has authority to arrest engages in conduct that is illegal, that we do whatever we need to do to prosecute that individual.
Help us understand, what is the relationship between what we call the San Antonio Police and the DA's office? Is there any oversight, or is it a joint relationship, so that people can understand the levels of authority and the handoff? How does that work?
I think the best way to explain that is that it's a partnership. It's the San Antonio Police Department, for example, is just one agency. It's the biggest law enforcement agency in the San Antonio area, but so is the Bexar County Sheriff's Department and other smaller agencies. And so the partnership exists because law enforcement is the agency that's the first line of contact. They're the ones that protect our community, and those are the ones. They are the officers that have the authority to make arrests. So those officers have to make decisions out on the field about whether or not there's probable cause to stop someone, where there's probable cause to arrest. After, let's say, for example, search is conducted and they find contraband or illegal weapons or the like, then they have to make a decision out in the field to arrest that individual. There are layers. For example, when an officer makes an arrest out on the field and he arrests that individual, then the accused is taken before a magistrate judge. I have the unique position of being the only candidate in the district attorney's race that served a number of years as a magistrate judge. I did that for 7 years. And I did it on the weekends when everybody was asleep. I jokingly said before I did that, my hair didn't used to be gray. And so, but spending 7 years being awake, reviewing those cases, setting bonds for everything from traffic offenses all the way to capital murder gave me a unique insight into what is proper arrest. And then I had to set what I thought was an appropriate amount of bail. So that again has given me a good backdrop to this job. But again, we're gonna look to see that everybody does their part, and we certainly have the ability to reject a case if we believe that there wasn't sufficient evidence or reason to arrest that individual. We're obviously going to give law enforcement the benefit of the doubt. But we're going to make sure that they do their job correctly. They have a job to do, and we're going to make sure that they do it correctly, as I'm sure they would require us to do our job correctly. And the citizens of Bexar County want everybody to be fair, and absolutely, what we're going to look to do is to prosecute those individuals that have broken the law.
So your message to the community in terms of our interaction. So let's say someone is stopped by a law enforcement officer. What would your message be to the community of what that interaction should look like?
Well, first of all, it's never a good thing to engage in any combative behavior with law enforcement. I think that the wiser practice is to cooperate with the officer. Now, I can't give an individual legal advice, obviously, but if an officer is making a stop, it may be that in his mind he believes there's reasonable suspicion to investigate a potential crime, and so the officer may be incorrect, but it doesn't do anyone any good for someone that is stopped to argue or
be
to
rude or anything.
Well, I mean, I understand people can get upset if they get stopped, especially if they feel like they're in the right and the officer's in the wrong.
Okay.
But the problem is those kinds of confrontations can escalate. And again, it's never a smart thing to do to challenge someone with authority, because that individual has a gun and a badge. And again, we don't ever want a situation where we're having to explain why someone was arrested for an unlawful arrest, because again it escalated and he decided to argue with the officer. If the officer makes an unlawful arrest, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I think the best approach is, again, to be calm and to the extent that they can is to let the officer do his job.
All right, so Joe, I'd like to take a break and then come back on the other side and really get into a little bit of more things that we can do as a community.
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Hello, I'm Tony Hendricks, Chief Operating Officer at Lewis Funeral Home. Lewis Funeral Home has been serving San Antonio and surrounding areas for over 100 years. Lewis Funeral Home's ultimate goal is to help those families in their time of need. If your family is ever in need, please feel free to call us at Lewis Funeral Home, 210-227-7281, or check us out on our website at lewisfuneralhome.com.
I've just been in an accident. What am I supposed to do?
Before you act, let me attack. I'm Nathaniel Mack. Call today, 333-MACK. You don't pay unless we win.
Let's call Mac.
Let's call Mac.
I tried Oxy at a couple of parties. I didn't know it'd be this addictive. I didn't know how far I'd go to get more.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth.
Nothing to do this week? Don't miss another event. Go to blacksinsanantonio.com for our event calendar. The home of the largest business directory in San Antonio with an African American focus. Sign up today for our weekly e-blast and text message alerts. Help us make this a better community. Connect, empower, grow.
So, Joe, there's some hot topics. We could talk for a week on the areas that we want to cover.
Sure.
And so one of the things that's come to my desk at the State House is a conversation around bail bonds reform. Why don't you share with us a little bit about how you're seeing that issue?
Okay. I know that in other jurisdictions across the country, there's a move to elimination of total cash bonds. What my concept of bail bond reform is, in my mind, in Bexar County, is those individuals that are sitting in jail, that are languishing, waiting to go to trial because they're too poor to bond out. So I'm talking about individuals that, for example, have committed nonviolent misdemeanors, for example, and maybe low-level drug offenses that will not or choose not to accept a plea bargain because they are maintaining their innocence, which they have a constitutional right to do. And so the problem is, if they don't have the ability to bond out because they don't have the funds to do that, and they insist on their day in court, they may have to wait in the local jail until they go to trial. And in some cases, on a misdemeanor, you may wait 6, 9 months to even a year. But on the felony level, it could be upwards of 2 years or more.
So you're talking about losing jobs, potentially losing family. There's a lot of issues that would impact someone.
Absolutely. And so what I would like to do as the elected DA is look as soon as we can to those cases where if we believe that there's no danger to the community, and again, if we're talking about low-level offenses where that individual doesn't have a criminal history, and we're going to offer them some sort of a diversionary program anyway, or some sort of probation that doesn't result in a conviction, then we need to ask ourselves, can we do something to agree to release those individuals back into the community, and so that they can avoid losing their jobs and they avoid losing their families, and then we'll see them when they have their day in court. So that's my concept of how we can do our part to reform the way the bail system operates here in Bexar County. Keep in mind that the bails that are set, as I mentioned before, is originally set at arrest with a magistrate judge, and then ultimately when that individual gets to court on a misdemeanor, a county court judge, and then on the felony level, a district court judge. But again, if I have prosecutors at the intake level, are there times where we might be able to agree initially to a PR bond so that the person can be released and not sit in jail waiting for those many months to go to trial? And so that's what I've been saying out in the community, and that's something that's important. That's one of my platform issues that I've been talking about, and that's certainly something that's going to be a priority with me.
Joe, one of the things I want to help my community realize too, there's a thinking that law enforcement has this negative perception on particularly African-American men, brown and black men. You've heard the conversations.
Sure.
And so that perception, we think, has led to some of over-sentencing, being harsh, and all of that. What can we do as a community to tamper down some of that feeling? Is it the relationship building? What can we do as a community so that we can say that we've offered a token of goodwill to our law enforcement community?
I think open communication with law enforcement whenever possible would go a long way. I think there is this level of distrust. As we mentioned before, there are bad apples in law enforcement, just like there are bad apples in the legal profession. But I think that if there's open communication, that would go a long way in bridging the gap of distrust. I know there are agencies that have made an effort to have outreach into the community to try and contact today's youth so that they have a better perception of law enforcement. So hopefully that'll change over time. Unfortunately, historically, there have been problems not only in Texas but throughout the country. We live in a time where we continually see issues of or allegations of police brutality or people that have negative experiences with law enforcement. And I think that we live, for the most part, and we're lucky that we have a community where we work well with law enforcement, and it's certainly a rare occasion when that happens. But hopefully I think that if everybody will work together, we can help, like I said, bridge the gap and work toward a common goal of safety for the community.
So moving forward, we recognize that we've talked a lot about what the community can do, some of those hot button issues. As you talk to the community, what do you want your legacy to be as a DA?
Well, I will tell you that one of the things that I have been concerned with is I believe, for example, the district attorney's office is an agency of the people. We serve you, and our job is to protect you and to prosecute those individuals that commit crimes. But that office also should be a reflection of this community. One of the things that I have noticed that there are no African American chiefs in the district attorney's office, and I cannot believe, and I will not believe, that there are not qualified individuals that can do that job. And one of the things that I'm certainly going to look at is whether or not we can appoint, if I'm fortunate enough to get into office, because remember, I'm not there yet.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But if I'm fortunate enough to get elected, I certainly think that it would be a good demonstration of our goodwill to have at least one or two members of the African American community reflected in the front office of the district attorney's
Well, I'm
office.
going to hold you accountable.
Yes,
for
ma'am.
that, Joe. I'm going to hold you accountable.
And obviously, as long as they're otherwise qualified, why not? Why not have that? Again, it should be reflective of our community. I don't mind telling you that I worked in the mid-'90s as a prosecutor in Harris County, and the makeup of the chiefs there were reflective of Houston, Texas.
Wow.
And it ought to be that way in San Antonio, and that's something that I'd like to do.
I love that, Joe. You know, again, we could talk for days and weeks about our issues. So as we head on to the campaign, until the election period, early voting is October 22nd. We're asking people to vote early, vote a lot, take people to the polls, so that we need you in that seat, Joe. One of the things that's close to my heart is that I'm committed to work with your office to make sure that as you need legislation, friendly legislation to law enforcement, I want to be a champion for that. And from what I'm hearing from you today, you'll be a champion for our community in terms of fairness, making sure we're represented. So in closing, what would you like to say to the community?
Well, what I'd like to do is remind them that we have early voting starting around the corner. It starts October 22nd. And of course, election date is November 6th. So I can't do anything for this community unless I get good people like yourselves and the rest of Bexar County to vote for me. So I'm asking for your support. I'm asking for your vote. And it is important to get out there to the voting booth early. If we can get the listeners to go out there and vote starting October 22nd, vote, obviously, vote the candidate of your choice, but vote. And obviously, I believe I'm the better candidate because not only because of all the things that I've talked about, because of my background, but because of where I've been and what my positions are. I believe that I'm better suited to bring justice, integrity, and efficiency to the district attorney's office. The last thing I'd like to say, if I might, is if people want to learn a little bit more about me, they can go onto my website at Gonzales 4DA. That's the number 4. So it's Gonzales 4, and it's Gonzales with an S at the end.
Okay.
Gonzales4DA.com. You can learn about my platform that includes bail bond reform, restorative justice, pretrial diversion, all the things that we've talked about today.
And so the people understand you're the Democratic candidate. Bexar County is heavily Democratic. We just need people to show up to vote. It's my understanding we have a lot of registered voters, but they haven't come out. So our plea to them today would be to show up and show out at the ballot box. We can win this and get you in if we get the numbers. So, and as you know, that I'm Barbara Gervin Hawkins, and I'm running for state representative. I have an opponent this coming election, and I'm really looking for the support of our community. And I can be reached at voteBarbaraGervinHawkins.com. And so I'm looking for our folks to show up and show out. And Joe, I am so happy that you're running and that we can continue our dialogue and work together to make a safe and better community. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yes. This is your state representative, Barbara Gervin Hawkins. I want to remind y'all of the election day. October 22nd is the start of early voting. November 6th is election day. I'm happy to have had this conversation with our future DA, Joe Gonzales. I am looking forward to seeing you at the polls. As a matter of fact, Joe, we're looking forward to seeing you. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And tune in. We're going to have this conversation again. Once Joe gets in, we're going to sit down and roll up our sleeves and work with him to make some things happen in the community. Thanks. See you at the polls.